This morning, I'm happy to bring to us again Reverend Terri Steinbrink. She has been a speaker for us for a number of years, and people always look forward to what she has to say to us. So I bring you Terri.
Well, some of you may be wondering about this eclectic mix of books that I have up here. And while it might seem that they're very diverse, they actually all have one thing in common. All of these books are ones that have either been challenged or banned in libraries and schools across the United States. And when Jacques called me and asked if I would speak here again, it happened to be the week of Banned Book Week. And it's always been a favorite topic of mine, and so I thought I would explore it a bit deeper and bring a talk to you guys about it. So let's explore some of the reasons that these books have been banned. Anne Frank. A real downer. Tarzan of the Apes. Tarzan was living in sin with Jane. Naughty, naughty. Gorillas in the Mist talks about gorillas mating. Yeah, that's what I said. One of my favorites, Entangle Makes Three, is a true story about two male penguins in the New York Central Park Zoo that formed a really special bond. And the zookeepers felt so strongly about this bond that they decided to give them their own egg. And these two penguins raised this egg and started their own family. And people banned the book because they felt like it advocated for gay relationships or same-sex marriage. Never mind that it was a true story. The dictionary has even been banned in some schools and libraries because, after all, we'd rather be illiterate than have our kids know about body parts we really don't want them to know about. The Rabbit's Wedding shows a black rabbit and a white rabbit getting married. Bet you can guess why this one was banned. Interracial marriage, don't want any of that. And one of the goofiest books, Captain Underpants, is actually been named one of the most dangerous characters in the United States because he's been banned more than probably any other character. And he's been banned for a variety of reasons. If anybody's ever read any of these books, they're silly little books that young boys like because they talk about farts and body kind of sounds, and they're just goofy, irreverent little books. So they've been banned for numerous reasons, but one of the most humorous reasons that it's been banned is because it's pornographic, because after all, he is in his underpants. So it might be apparent that I'm poking fun at some of the ludicrous reasons that these books have been banned. Ludicrous, I might add, in my opinion. If we can poke fun at it, what's the big deal? So a few books get taken out of the libraries. Doesn't really affect us, does it? Seems pretty minor. But Wendell Lewis Wilkie, a U.S. politician, had this to say about it in 1944. He said, "Now more than ever, we must keep at the forefront of our minds that whenever we take away the liberty of those we hate, we are opening the way to loss of liberty for those we love." And author Alice Walker said, "If I open my mouth to speak, must I always be correct, and by whose standards?" These quotes remind us that if we want freedom of expression, we must be willing to honor that right for others. Sigmund Freud brought a little humor to the subject when he said, "What progress we're making. In the Middle Ages, they would have burned me. Now they're content with burning my books." While he used humor, he brings up an important point. What happens when our fears cross the line into something more serious? As in the case of Congo, where an $8 million civil rights suit was filed against a California school district because a parent felt that the book was part of a racially discriminatory practice. $8 million. That would make a school district think twice before not agreeing to ban a book. Or the teacher in Oklahoma who was fired for assigning the book Catcher in the Rye to her 11th grade English class. Well, that still doesn't affect us, does it? What about when it hits closer to home? In many Billings schools, books have been challenged or banned. Recently in Laurel, the book's Fool's Crow was banned after one parent complained, even though several members of the school board admitted they hadn't even read the book before agreeing to ban it. When author James Welch discovered it had been banned, he commented, "I just find it a surprise, and I think it's sad for the young people of Laurel, because they won't get to learn more about Indian culture." Censorship and book banning are not new to Montana. During World War I, the Montana Sedation Act was passed in 1918. This law criminalized anything that seemed anti-government. People could be in a bar, having a few drinks, talking about disagreeing with the president, or even saying something as minor as, "Boy, didn't the food in the war really suck?" And off to jail they went. 76 men and women were arrested for daring to make any critical comments about the war or the government. They were locked up in the state penitentiary in Deer Lodge and were sentenced for up to 20 years with $20,000 fines. $20,000 fines in 1918. Put it in perspective. In addition, part of the laws that came along were that you couldn't speak German, and you sure as heck couldn't own a German book. German books were gathered up all across Montana, and there were book burnings. When I researched this, I wasn't aware of this, and my ancestors are all German, so I found this interesting to wonder what they had gone through during those years. Scary to think that less than 100 years ago, this kind of thing was going on right here. Lois Lowry, who wrote The Giver, which has been banned in many, many, many schools, touched on the dangers of this kind of censorship when she said, "Submitting to censorship is to enter the seductive world of the giver, the world where there are no bad words and no bad deeds. But it is also the world where choice has been taken away and reality distorted. And that is the most dangerous world of all." And one of the interesting things about, because a lot of these books I checked out from the library, and it was fun to have the books at my house for quite a while because I went back and reread books that I hadn't read since high school, and The Giver was one of those books. Actually, I was a little older because that book came out probably, I'm going to say about 25 years ago. And what's interesting is that to this day, she still receives letters from people who both thank her for the book, who are very touched by the book, but she also receives letters from people saying that she should burn in hell for writing this book. And in rereading the book, I still cannot find what people are, object to so strongly in this book, but for whatever reason, it touches on a lot of nerves. A poem by Ellen Hopkins captures this whole essence of book banning. She says, "A word to the unwise, torch every book, char every page, burn every word to ash. Ideas are incombustible, and therein lies your real fear." We do have reason to celebrate in Billings, though. As a result of the commitment of our libraries and the people in the community, most book challenges are not followed through on, and most books don't get banned here. When the book, The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian, was in danger of being banned from the Skyview curriculum, there was a lot of people that showed up to really talk about this because they felt strongly about it not being banned. And in the end, the decision was made to not ban the book. And really what this book had going against it is very similar to what some of the other books that are banned have going against them, is that they touch a little too close to reality. They touch on things we're really uncomfortable looking at. The Fault in Our Stars is a book about teenage love between two young cancer patients. One parent felt that a book that dealt with teenage death was not appropriate and had the book banned. The author of the book, John Green, had this to say when he heard the book had been banned. "I am happy because apparently young people in Riverside, California will never witness or experience mortality since they won't be reading my book." Tongue-in-cheek, he reminds us that life happens, and sheltering our children is not the answer. 12-year-old Rory Edwards said, "I don't want to be shut out from the truth. If they ban books, they might as well shut us away from the world." Mildred D. Taylor said, "Although there are those who wish to ban my books because I have used language that is painful, I have chosen to use the language that was spoken during the period, for I refuse to whitewash history. The language was painful, and life was painful for many African Americans, including my family. I remember the pain. Shandy Kurth added to this saying, "Bring on the controversy. I write real life. It's harsh and sometimes gritty, but it's real. Why should we tiptoe around that?" Banning books to avoid things we're uncomfortable with is not the answer. But sometimes people feel so strongly that they take matters into their own hands. Like the time when I was in high school and I bought a book only to get it home and discover that somebody had blacked out a lot of the words in the book. They'd taken a Sharpie marker and diligently gone through the book and blacked out these words that they didn't want other people to read. Of course, this only got me more curious to see what they felt like they were protecting me against, so I had to go buy another book just to read it. Then in my 20s, I read a quote by Anais Nin that just touched me so much I wanted to know more about this woman. So I went to the Billings Library and said they had quite a few books written by this woman, but I couldn't find them on the shelves. So I asked the librarian about it. She said, people were really protesting about this book, and they wanted us to ban this book, or all of her books. And we refused, and so people either stole the books or they went into the back and ripped them up and damaged them so that people couldn't read them. So these books were all destroyed by someone who felt no one should read them. Does someone have the right to tell us what we can read? American critic Joseph Henry Jackson asked, "Did you ever hear anyone say, that work had better be banned because I might read it and it might be very damaging to me?" Usually when books are banned, it's because we think we're protecting somebody else. Okay, I've made it clear I'm not a fan of banning books, but now for a little self-honesty. When I was a parent, censorship crept in quite a bit. Being a parent is challenging, trying to learn that balance between giving your children freedom to discover things and at the same time feeling like you're protecting them. There was one example when my son was in grade school, and he came home, he was all excited. An artist had visited his classroom that day, and he wanted to tell me all about what this artist had to say. And he said, he was so funny, Mom. He said when he was a little boy, he didn't have any paper to draw on, but he really wanted to draw and paint. So every time his stepfather would fall asleep, he would draw and paint on his stepfather who was laying there in his underwear. My son thought this was funny. But what he thought was especially funny was that this man had a fat stomach. And so the boy would paint and draw on his stepfather's fat stomach. My son thought this was hilarious. I was outraged. I called this artist up. "What the heck do you think you're doing talking about this fat stomach? There might be fat children in that classroom, and how do you think they're going to feel hearing you talk about that?" I was justified, of course, because I was protecting the children. In reality, I was uncomfortable with my own weight, and I didn't want to be reminded of that. Our fears always say far more about us than they do about what we censor. Our job is to look at what we're trying to protect ourselves from and the cost of this kind of protection. Often, a strong reaction to something we read or hear can indicate that there's something in us that wants to be healed, that there's some war going on inside of us that then we project out onto the world. Spirituality and religion are often the justification for the wars that are waged in the world, whether it's a war to ban a book or to eradicate a population. In Disappearance of the Universe, it talks about that for nearly 2,000 years it was strictly forbidden to question the Bible or the church. It wasn't until 1965 that the Vatican reversed these policies and granted individuals the freedom to inquire into theology. So is it any wonder that after years of repression, we're still resistant to having our beliefs challenged? And when you think about it, 1965, I'm willing to bet that most of us were around in 1965. Not all that long ago. And as a result of this kind of repression, many of us have experienced religious wounding in our lives, which only adds fuel to the fire. When I adopted my son, Trent, I felt very strongly about the fact that I wanted him to be able to explore his own spiritual path. So on the day that I adopted him, I sat down and I wrote him a long letter. And I talked about how important he was to me and how much I cherished him, and that no matter what spiritual path he chose to follow, I would support that. Well, as some of you know, my son is Native American, so I thought maybe he would explore his birth spirituality. Well, the joke was on me. Because in junior high, Trent was invited to evangelical, going to hell, fire and brimstone church. He loved this church. I still hadn't healed my own issues around Christianity. But I felt strongly enough about my promise to support him that I continued to support him in going to this church. And supporting him didn't just mean saying, bye, have a good time as he walked out the door. It meant actually going and sitting in those services with him. And it ended up being one of the most precious experiences I ever had with my son. Because we would sit in those services, and over time, my own issues began to heal. And as that happened, we could have conversations. And we could say, wow, I really liked when they said this. And that was a pretty song they sang. But, I didn't really agree with these parts. And we had some deep conversations around this fellowship. But what was really amazing to me is that even though I didn't agree with most of what these people said, probably very little of what they said, what did happen is that I came to fall in love with these people. Because as they stood up one by one and shared their individual stories, and they talked about their hard times, many of them were recovering from drug addiction, some were out of prison, and they talked about their struggles and their journey to God. And I could relate to coming to God the hard way. And so I understood these people, and I really came to love them, even though I didn't necessarily agree with all of their theology. But my point in this story is how powerful it can be when we face our own fears and those places within us that haven't healed and can have honest conversations about all aspects of it. Judy Blume said, let children read whatever they want and then talk about it with them. If parents and kids can talk together, we won't have as much censorship because we won't have as much fear. Shel Silverstein, who's written many, many books that are just silly little poems and ditties, and I would venture to say that most, if not all, of his books have been banned in some schools or libraries, often for really ludicrous reasons. One of them was banned because it made kids want to eat hippopotamus sandwiches. One was banned because it made kids want to break dishes rather than wash them. So what would happen if when our kids came to us and said, I really don't want to wash dishes, and this book says I can just break them, we sat down and we said, wow, what would happen if we broke all our dishes? We wouldn't have anything to eat on. Or what would happen if you really tried to eat a hippopotamus sandwich? Do you think he'd hold still while you tried to put the salt and pepper and ketchup on him? What if instead of racing to the library to demand that they pull this book off the shelf because it makes our kids want to break the dishes, we had an honest-to-goodness conversation? What a novel idea. One of my biggest struggles as a parent was rap music. Trent and I went round and round about rap music. We finally came to sort of an agreement where before he could buy a CD, I had to listen to it. And at that time, and I don't know if Hastings still does this or not, but at that time you could go into Hastings and you could ask them to put in a CD, and two people could put on headphones and listen to the same CD at the same time. Well, he liked this artist called Eminem. And I'm so out of rap music, I don't even know if Eminem is still around. But at that time, Eminem was big. So we put on our headphones, and we're listening, and Trent's just bopping along to the music, and I'm listening to the words. We get partway through one of the songs, and I felt like I was going to throw up. I took the headphones off, and Trent took his headphones off. He looks at me, and I said, Trent, do you know what this song is about? He said, no, Mom, I don't know what this song is about. I just really like the music. I'll listen to the words. The music's just cool. And I said, well, if you listen to the words, the song is about a man waiting in the backseat of a car with duct tape and rope, waiting to climb over the seat and rape a woman in the front seat. And Trent said, oh, I didn't know what that song was about. I don't think I want to buy this CD. And I think later in life, Trent did go on to buy some M&M CDs and probably even this very CD. But that isn't the point. What the point is that we had a conversation about it. And he got to hear my opinion as a woman, what it felt like listening to those words. And I think that that's the important part, is that we have these conversations with our children, even if we eventually reach the point where we say, no way, you're not going to have that CD, that we at least have a conversation about why we're saying that. And ironically, even though music was one of our biggest battles, it was also music that helped me to see how being a controlling parent was really damaging to my son. And I went to a variety show that my son was a part of, and there were a bunch of children that were putting on this variety show. They created the whole thing themselves, and one by one they got up to do this variety show. And one of the young women got up and she read the lyrics from a song by Linkin Park called Numb. And as I sat in the audience and I listened to these words, I started to cry because I thought the words were so powerful. And I'd like to read a few of the words to you. It says, I've become so numb, I can't feel you there. Become so tired, so much more aware. I'm becoming this. All I want to do is be more like me and be less like you. And I know I may end up failing too, but I know you were just like me with someone disappointed in you. I know I may end up failing too, but I know you were just like me with someone disappointed in you. And when I heard those words, I remembered what it felt like to feel like people were disappointed in me. And that certainly wasn't the message I wanted to give my son. Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee is another Native American book that was removed by a district administrator who said the book was slanted. And if there's a possibility that something might be controversial, then why not eliminate it? If there's a possibility that something might be controversial, why not eliminate it? Is there anything that isn't controversial to someone? If we eliminate everything controversial, what would we be left with? Charlotte's Web, which is one of my favorite books, was banned along with a scat of other books when an English teacher removed every single book in the school that featured pigs. Every single book that had a pig in it. Her reasoning, it might offend a Muslim student. The Muslim Council heard about this, and they said, wow, it's well-intentioned but misguided. And they requested that the books be reinstated. Well-intentioned but misguided. That pretty much sums up a lot of the banning that we see. I know that it sums up a lot of the banning that I see as an interfaith minister. I became an interfaith minister because I find such beauty in all the paths that people choose. And I speak to a lot of diverse groups. But even with all the diversity in the groups I speak to, I've discovered that not everything is welcome. In fact, sometimes in the name of diversity, censorship rears its head. Some people are offended by the word God. Others, if you use anything but the word God. Sometimes preparing a talk can feel like trying to navigate a minefield. This is perhaps one of the most diverse groups that I speak to. And yet one of the most interesting things that happened in this very church probably about 8 years ago. And it was when I still was fairly new here, and so people weren't really sure what kind of message I was bringing, and so I always had to tell my talk title and kind of get it approved ahead of time. And one time I said, okay, well, my talk title is Be the Change. And I was told, nope, you can't do that talk because not everybody in our congregation is voting for Obama. Oh. And I said, but my talk doesn't have anything to do with Obama. It's about Gandhi's quote, be the change. But the idea was, didn't want to offend anybody. And at the time, I had a hard time understanding that. And it took me a long time to come to the realization that anytime a reading, a talk, a song, anything is banned, it comes from the place of caring. Because we truly don't want to offend anybody. And the more diverse a group is, the more there is to guard against. In an attempt to not offend anyone, soon nothing is allowed. But if the things that bring up discomfort for us are truly about the places where we're at war within ourselves, then perhaps being exposed to things we're uncomfortable with provides an opportunity for self-exploration and healing. Are we willing to open our hearts and minds to the inner exploration into our own discomfort? And I know that anytime I speak, I hope that I stir people up a little bit. Maybe even make them a little uncomfortable, because that's how we stretch and grow. If you come here and you only hear the things you already know or the things you already believe, then what's the point? You might as well just sit at home and listen to your own thoughts. So I hope that I challenge a little bit. Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart said, "Censorship reflects a society's lack of confidence in itself." Censorship reflects a society's lack of confidence in itself. I saw a wonderful poster that said, "Don't ban books. Teach your children how to self-censor." And Voltaire said, "Think for yourself and let others enjoy the privilege to do so too." Think for yourself and let others enjoy the privilege to do so too. One of the greatest gifts we can give our children and ourselves is the ability to think for ourselves and not be so fearful of differing ideas and beliefs. And I'm not in any way trying to say that we should just say, bring it all on, everything's wonderful. But when we heal those places within ourselves, we can come from a place that's more responsive rather than reactive. Because when we're reactive, we just slam the door on everything. But when we can be responsive, we can have some conversations about things in the community. So I encourage you this week to pay attention to the things that make you uncomfortable. Pay attention to the things that stir you up a little bit. And just check in and see if there is something in you that needs to be healed, something in you that perhaps you're projecting out. Because in truth, as we come to realize that there are more similarities than differences, we also come to realize that we're all one, that there truly is nothing but oneness. And so it is. Thank you.